Welcome to the Soft Rebellion. What becomes possible when we listen to the womb, pelvis and menstrual cycle as archives of unacknowledged creativity and even compasses pointing us towards feminist and decolonial futures. My name is Florina. I'm an osteopath, holistic pelvic care practitioner and dancer doing a PhD on the moving body, imagination, health and the menstrual cycle. The Soft Rebellion is my playground, a research-led podcast where my guests join me for an embodied rediscovery of the cyclical body as a source of healing, belonging and activism. These trailblazing conversations are rooted in Black feminist theory, creative and healing arts, indigenous wisdom and critical menstrual studies, to expand beyond a medical pathologizing well-being framework into an understanding of the menstruating body as a wellspring of softly rebellious knowledge. Hello and welcome, dear listener. Welcome back to another and the last episode before a summer break of the Soft Rebellion podcast. Yeah, what if sexual freedom isn't about becoming someone new, but remembering who we've always been? In this episode, I sit down with the author, activist and cultural visionary Nana Darkoa Sekyiamah to explore pleasure as a form of resistance. Together we discuss African wisdom traditions, the cyclical nature of women's bodies, decolonizing sexuality and why reclaiming pleasure may be one of the most radical acts available to us today. Nana Darkoa is a groundbreaking voice and advocate for African and Afro descendant women's experiences of sex, sexuality and pleasure. Her debut book, The Sex Lives of African Women, was an instant classic, lauded by Publishers Weekly as an astonishing report on the quest for sexual liberation, and was named a Best Book of the Year by The Economist. Nana is the celebrated co-founder of the popular website Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. She is a renowned podcaster, a festival co-curator and the co-founder of the Institute of Journalism and Social Change. And her transformative work has earned her international recognition, including a spot on the BBC's 100 Inspirational and Influential Women list and New Africa magazine's list of 100 inspirational Africans. And yeah, it was an absolute honor, pleasure, and just so deeply inspirational and full of remembering to sit with Nana Darkoa and to talk about her work. And we spoke especially about her book, Sexual Freedom, which is the book I know best of hers. And yeah, not more from my side. I suggest let's dive in, enjoy. And maybe just very briefly, as I said in the beginning, this is the last episode before I go on a 2 months break of the podcast. And this is even though over the last 3 months, as you might have noticed, I've already been much more on and off. Respectively, I haven't been on and off, but the Soft Rebellion at the moment follows its very own rhythm. You might know or have noticed through the introduction since last September, I'm doing a PhD doctoral research at Goldsmiths University in London, which is an absolutely wonderful process and an absolutely intense process. And this podcast is as menstrual cycle and research led as it possibly could. And this means not only in terms of its content, but also in terms of my capacity, energy and availability. but it is ongoing and continuous, and I'm here and I will show up. And yeah, for the next few years, it might just be a little bit less predictable. But isn't that the joy of life? Okie dokes, let's dive in. Hello and welcome, Nana, on the Soft Rebellion podcast. Welcome.
I mean, I'm always down for a soft rebellion, so really happy to be in conversation with you. I feel like the
Mm.
best rebellions are soft, right? The best
Yes.
rebellions are just full of ease. It's
Mm.
in how we live our lives, it's in the small day-to-day actions. It's how we ensure that we're able to sustain the rebellion and the resistance.
Yes. Yes. That reminds me, and now her name just leaves my mind. I had a conversation, the author of the book, Women Who Work Too Much. You probably would know her if I. And that's exactly what she said. Yes.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely.
Because the soft rebellion, it is an act of activism to be softly rebellious. And the most important is that we can, what you say, sustain it. If we burn
Exactly.
ourselves out as activists, then
Yeah, and then you need to sort of give up and you just, you're like, what's the point? But when
mm,
you stay soft, when you stay gentle, when you stay kind to yourself and to others, it allows you to keep going. It allows you to sustain yourself. So yeah, I love this name of your podcast.
thank you. Yeah, I've got a whole document with so many questions I would like to ask you. I first read your book Sexual Freedom, and now I've been listening to it, which was actually such a nice experience to hear your voice. I always think like, wow, it's so different when I read it or when I have it read by the person or woman who actually typed or chose those words. So it was a really nice preparation for our conversation to drop back into your work and into your voice, into your story more fully. And, I think where I would like to begin, one of those, a more broad question, which is with me, is what different traditions know about freedom, pleasure, embodiments, and the female body, and what gets erased when one worldview becomes dominant. And it's very interesting, Nana, because the conversation before now ours I had was with someone called Carly Mountain. She is a UK writer and sexual therapist. And we wrote about her very recent book called Untamed Pleasure. And so I talked to her whilst I was listening to your audiobook, right? So one thing that really struck me was that both of your books seem to be responding to a similar hunger. Women wanting to come home to their bodies and pleasures. Yet you are coming from very different cultural lineages and histories. And your work from African rights, you talk about African rights and rituals on sexualities. So I was imagining, if I would be speaking to both of you at the same time, I would say, wow, I'm so curious what feels similar to you in that quest and what feels fundamentally different. And I would want to probably ask you what you think Western conversations about feminine empowerment might still be struggling to see. And now, of course, I know you haven't read Carly's book and we aren't here, the three of us, but I thought I would open the conversation with that because that felt very potent, that is happening in this close, timely close together. I speak with two women talking about sexuality, but from so different backgrounds and angles. And yeah, maybe with that very wordy introduction, I would like to invite you to walk us into your body of work and the story behind your body of work.
I feel I feel like the story behind my body of work is very much a very personal story.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in Ghana,
Mm-hmm.
and if I was what I guess anyone would describe as a late bloomer, right? My first consensual my first consensual sexual activity with a man was just before my 23rd birthday, and I married that man. And it was, you know, just before my 30th birthday that I thought, wait, what have I done? Like, is this the only person I want to be with sexually until the end of my life? And the answer for me was no, right? So I left the marriage. And one of the things I realized then that I had bought into the stereotype of being a good girl. I had grown up being told I needed to be a good girl. A good girl did not have sex with boys. A good girl,
No worries.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
Listen, should we pause it? And let me just turn off my WhatsApp, okay? Because
Yeah, that's fine. These things happen.
yeah, sometimes, yeah. Okay, so can I continue, or would you like me to start
Yeah.
again? What in terms of the
No,
editing?
you can just continue. I can edit this out. Yeah.
All right. So what I'd been told growing up was a good girl did not have sex with boys. I mean, and that came from a place of, I understand that came from a place of society, my mother wanting to protect me from falling pregnant, right? But the result of that fearful approach to sex education was I was just really fearful of sex, right? And all I saw around me were people gossiping about girls who were believed to be promiscuous. The fact that you had had sex, you were considered promiscuous. It wasn't. And then I later realized that actually people were just, in a sense, usually lying about who they had slept with, and I only realized that when I became the subject of gossip myself. And so for me, when I entered my 30s, I realized that I needed to forget about the noise of society and I needed to figure out what sexual pleasure would be like for me without any sense of shame. And so I entered the era that I now describe fondly as my whole era, right? Where I was deliberate and seeking to explore sex with men, with women, to figure out, what my sexuality was, what gave me pleasure, what felt safe, what felt comfortable. And that's got me started on blogging. I started to write a blog. I co-founded a blog called Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. And I later realized that the title was prescient because it wasn't really about my bedroom, but it was about a collective bedroom experience, right? Because other African women, other Afro-descendant women started to read the blog, started to resonate, would write me messages, would start telling their stories to me. And then I would say, hey, why don't you write for the blog? And I eventually gave all of these women who I had never met, many to this day I have still never met, their own usernames and passwords so they could log onto my blog and publish their stories. And the blog became really, really popular. And I realized that, oh my goodness, there's so many incredible stories that African women have to share with the world. But the world just assumes our experiences are limited. I felt that particularly in Western media, we were portrayed as women who were, hapless victims of patriarchy, who were all genitally mutilated. And, if you were genitally mutilated, it meant you had no access to pleasure, who were miserable wives in polygamous marriages, who were dying of HIV and AIDS. And I felt like that was only one part of the story, right? Our stories were way more interesting, way more expansive, way more diverse. So I started out deliberately wanting to interview as many African and Afro-descendant women from across the continent and the globe. And I was lucky that I worked for a feminist organization. And as part of my job, I used to travel quite a bit. So everywhere I went, I would just look for a woman to interview. Even when I was on holiday, I would speak to the tour guide and say, that's how I interviewed a woman from Sao Tome. I was on holiday. I became friends with the tour guide, Fernando. I said, Fernando, do you know any woman here who would, be happy to speak to me about their sex lives? And he introduced me to a woman called Vera Cruz. And on my last day before going to the airport, we started by the beach and I interviewed her. We had a great conversation, and those stories I was collecting eventually became the sex lives of African women. And so, I felt like it started with me and then it broadened and became about community. And I feel like that's kind of like how all my interests start. I'm trying to figure out something for myself. I'm trying to get free, right? And in trying to get free, part of the process is speaking to other women, about their experiences, finding usually there's something in common, something that resonates, and learning through the process. Yeah, so
Mm.
that's basically how I got here. I feel like I've given you a very long-winded answer, a long-winded answer.
Mm. No, but a very inspiring one, right? I'm so with you there. I think the seed for the work we have to do. I always think if I research something, it's actually not a research question, but it's a research longing because of course it probably
Mhm.
even comes from my own pain and grief, right? More than which then might transform, often transforms into a joy and a passion. But so yeah, that's radiating out from me to then the collective. I think that is probably the most powerful way to do it because we keep this reference connect to the, I want to say to roots, to core,
Yeah,
to right.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. For me, I think it
Mm.
always starts within. And I feel like that's the most interesting type of research, right? It's the research where you're not like this supposedly neutral, objective anthropologist, right? You yourself are very much implicated in the work. You yourself have a stake in the work.
Yes. Yeah. I wonder if I think back to what I said in the beginning, my thinking about, wow, how does Nana's and Carly's work? It's the same and it's different. And
Tell me a
one
little
of the
bit of
things,
Natalie's work. What did you find like similar and different about her work?
I mean, what did I find similar? The similar thing is both that invitation also very practically for women to explore their sexualities, their pleasures in new way. It's also her book is hugely about dismantling and alchemizing shame. You said to forget about the cultural noise of sexuality. That's absolutely at the core um, of Carly's work as well. But then what is different is you bring so many, I want to say, broader structures, both, gosh, historical, you speak a lot about colonization, which I find is so important. And that's where I just wanted to come to because one of my aims, and I hope sometimes I manage and sometimes I don't, but one of the mains of this podcast is that I don't want to maintain or contribute to what I call the white wellness industry, where we practice culture inscription, completely forgetting that other traditions did what we now think is new for
Yes,
many years, right?
yes,
So that is one of the differences, right? If a white
yes.
woman, if I or if Carl, if we reclaim our sexuality, we have, what is the right word to say? There are different there are certain, I'm going to now say, um, layers of colonization which are resting
Mhm.
on our bodies. In the end, I
Mhm.
guess every female body has been colonized in one way or the
Yeah.
other, but it's a different weight on my body than on
Mhm.
your body. And I would like, can you speak a little bit to that? Because you have a really potent 90-minute long chapter on your book about exactly that. And
Yes.
I feel it's very important that we speak about that before we go into more practicalities. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the subjects I address in my book, Seeking Sexual Freedom, is how colonization, in combination with patriarchy and
Mm-hmm.
racism, has reshaped
Mm-hmm.
um, African people's understanding of gender and sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And part of what I've learned through my research is the there was just more of a broader spectrum of I'm not sure right now what the right word to use it, but there was just a broader spectrum of even types of relationships that were traditionally
Mm-hmm.
respected. So, for example, across many parts of Eastern, Western, and Southern Africa, there were many ways in which families could be created. There were many
Mm-hmm.
woman to woman marriages, for instance, right? And these were marriages that were conducted in customarily ways according to the traditions of a particular culture or people. And these were marriages that were respected. There were, some families that were polygamous, for instance. The idea of a relationship that's verified currently at least in West Africa, which is where I'm from, is, a heterosexual relationship, which only came in with colonization, right? And now in a country like Ghana, where I live, we have members of parliament who have just for the second time passed an anti-LGBTI bill, which bans identifying as queer, which bans any kind of marriage other than that between a man and a woman, which for me is ridiculous and ahistorical. And part of their argument is that, anything around same-sex marriages is un-African. And that is like literally not true. History tells us it's not true. What history tells us is that it was rather through colonization that, the colonial states said the only legitimate type of marriage is a marriage between a man and one woman. And so for me, it's really important for people to know history, and to recognize that the homophobia, the type of homophobia that we see being expressed nowadays is actually new. That is what is actually un-African. That is actually what is not indigenous. But this knowledge is out there, so I just only hope that my book contributes to making that knowledge more and more accessible. And so it's why I make a call for Sankofa. And Sankofa comes from Akan philosophy. And what Sankofa says is it's important to be able to go back to your roots and retrieve what is good from your past. Sankofa doesn't advocate for going back for everything wholesale, because we also know that in many of our cultures, there were very, very problematic practices, right? And I make a case for approaching Sankofa from a feminist lens. If we are to think of the best of who we are today, if we are to think of the human rights of women, of people of all genders, what are the good practices we can take from the past? I, for instance, think a good practice is making space and time for an intergenerational transfer of knowledge about bodies, about sex, about sexualities, right? I think puberty rights held so much value. And in the past, people spent ages passing on that knowledge. In Ghana, we had the Krobo people, for example, who would spend over a year doing what they called the Depot rites, And that still happens today, but much shorter. And I'm like, if we're to take a feminist approach to that, what would we do? What's the knowledge we'll share with men and boys, with boys and girls? What's the knowledge we'll pass on from older women to younger women? Knowledge that we pass on to young girls. What would it be like to teach them about their bodies, to teach them about sex? But not to teach them to say, as a girl, you need to please your husband, right? How about her own well-being? What would we teach her about self-pleasure, right? What would we say to her about maybe the benefits of waiting, not so you don't fall pregnant, but just so you have time to focus on yourself, just so you have time to understand your own body and your own emotions, right? So yes, again, I'm giving very, very long answers to the questions you're asking.
No, but long, but good, right? It should be long. And it's interesting, as you spoke, I was thinking of the book. I'm sure you know the book, The Invention of Women.
Yes.
Right? Which was so, wow. And the image of woman making African sense of Western gender discourse. Yeah, I thought of that when I heard you speak, because for me that was so many light bulbs going on, realizing, wow, actually, that was, we brought the idea of gender, even the idea of woman and what is right and wrong into those other cultures, and then used that labeling to uphold our Western heteropatriarchal, outrageous if you begin to untangle what happens there. And how that's then, maybe you can say a little bit more about how that's then impacts what we sexually, in our sexual practices, what we live or don't live, because obviously the view on gender is then how do you say, produces like a view on what is right and wrong sexual practices.
Yes, absolutely. When you bring in notions of gender that may not have existed in particular contexts. When you bring in notions of what is proper when it comes to sexuality, what is respectable, what is Christian, you just remove space for a broader expression of gender, a broader expression of sexuality, right? When you take away people's traditional practices or label them as demonic and shameful, you take away a people's right to practice their own culture, to experience freedom. And this is documented across the continent, you know. And I think what I'm making a claim for, I don't want to verify one type of relationship structure over another,
Yes.
right? But what I want to make a case for is for us to recognize that there are many ways in which people can find love. There are many ways in which people can create family. And what we need is a society that allows people to figure out the types of relationship structures that works for them. I really like the idea of a pluriverse, right?
Yes.
Where we have a society where people can thrive in the different formations that work for them, where we don't have a big state, you know, legislating who people can love and how they can love and saying this is the only accepted form of family that can exist. You know, on the continent, we've had many types of families. People have lived in multi-generational households. We have some type of cultures where it's women-only households, right? Amongst the Ghans of Ghana, it's very traditional to have a grandmother, a mother, and a girl child living together. And I think that's a beautiful thing, right? As a people, that we find the systems and structures that work for us and we live within those structures.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for naming that. And I love the term pluriverse. I sometimes use the word multiverse. My research focuses on the cyclical, on the menstruating body, and sexuality is a part of that. And with, you know, in that discourse, there is so often this thing that we go from one tyranny to the next in a way, what you just said, but right? Either you hate your cycle or you love your cycle. And I also want to claim for, wow, hey, each of us will have our very own unique narrative of what that means to us. Not just love or hate, there is a whole spectrum in between. And if that's what we hold, then probably we'll all unfold our very own unique menstrual practices in the same, like you said, how we find it make love and create families. Right? And
I really love that. Yeah, I really love that. Yeah. And also just being able to live more according to the cycle of life that we're in and recognizing that life is cyclical and, you know, there's a different season. I feel the same way about sexuality, right? I'm 49 and I've seen how my desire has waned, but not in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable, right? In a way that feels appropriate for the season of my life where I'm super busy, where I'm raising a 6-year-old as a single mother. And it's very different from how I was in my 30s. It has been interesting to observe because I feel very at ease with where I am with my sexuality right now, right? I'm used to my sexuality being at like a 9 or 10, and now it's very much like at a 3 or 4. And I'm like, oh, this is the season I'm in now. And I don't worry about it because I have spent a lot of time interviewing older women about their sexuality. And I know there's so many older women who have great sex lives. And so I'm just like, oh, this is the season. Okay, all right. Maybe next year my season will be different. So I like the idea of recognizing the different cycles of life that we're in. I think definitely moving through menstrual cycles teaches us that and adjusting both our expectations, you know, because I think if you're in a particular cycle and you're resisting that cycle, you get really stressed, right? But if you're in a particular cycle and you recognize, oh, this is the cycle I'm in. And so this is how it's okay that this is the cycle I'm in. I think that also comes with
wow, so wonderful. You've just kind of answered 2 questions I had because I thought, wow, like I said before, I talk a lot about the cyclical body, the menstruating body, And I really wanted to ask you, what do you think that sexual freedom, sexual desire, pleasure is different when a woman understands herself as cyclical rather than just constant linear? And you speaking about how you experience seasons of your sexuality, I find that so empowering and goes against a very dominant narrative of what we learn about the menstrual cycle, because what we usually learn is ovulation. Well, menstruation means now I have sexual maturity and I can get pregnant, reproduction, right? It's about, and that just ovulation is about having sex and fertility. But we don't talk about that spectrum of sexual desire, feelings, energetic shifts over a menstrual cycle. And then, of course, you spoke to over the life cycle, the bigger macrocosmic cycle as women.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And for me, like, it's given me great joy speaking particularly to older women, And actually, I feel like even in the UK, there's been a lot of like conversation about this more recently, right? Where people have realized that, older people have active sex lives, and people in homes, are even catching STDs because nobody is thinking of targeting them when it comes to like family planning and, sex education. And for me, that has been really comforting because I feel like until very recently, and even now it's not enough, the media never portrays older people as sexual, right? The media tends to portray younger people as sexual. And so I'm sure for some old people, they may have even been surprised to find they are still very much alive where their libido is concerned,
Yes.
So I think this is super important.
Yeah, and when I now hear you talk about the elder people and other, maybe that can bring us a little bit, because you kind of opened the big first part of the book. A major part is when you write about your experience of having a sexual auntie. That's how a sex auntie. And with together with that, another question I had is, can you talk a bit more what we have forgotten about sexuality and pleasure and what becomes possible when we remember? And I could also ask that question, if every girl had a wise sex auntie. I did not have that. And luckily my family was very open-minded, but gosh, I wished I would have had this elder wise mentor, someone I would have just entrusted all the questions. But if every girl had a wise sex auntie, what would she tell her? What would we remember about sexuality and pleasure from a much younger age?
Yeah, that's one of the things I advocate for, right? That parents identify, older women they trust and appoint them as their daughter's sex auntie, right? Because kids are not always comfortable going to their mom, for instance. And if they have an auntie who has fostered a close relationship with them, that might be somebody they can go to ask questions that they may not feel comfortable asking their own parent. And I got this idea because of a practice and custom that come from the Buganda people of Uganda. And there was a role of Esther Senga, and that's usually a paternal aunt. And a paternal aunt is entrusted with, in a sense, bringing up her niece as a proper Buganda woman, right? And there are many roles that aunt plays, but part of her role is sex education. And one of the things an aunt might do, a paternal aunt might do as a practice, teach her niece how to pull her labia, which is a practice that the Buganda do. The idea being that a pulled labia makes sex more enjoyable for both the man and the woman, right? So it's been portrayed in a heteronormative way. The thing that I actually really appreciated about that practice was it teaches young girls to touch their genitalia, which a lot of the time, in society, little girls are shamed for going anywhere near their vulva, right? But this is a natural thing that kids do. And so I love that the Bugandas actually encourage girls to become familiar with their genitalia. I think that's radical. I think that's a practice that, the rest of us could learn from, as well as the practice of having an aunt who goes to all of this extra effort And it's not just the Bugandas that have this practice. I was interviewing a friend from Senegal, and she was saying amongst the Wolofs, there's a similar practice where, again, it's a paternal aunt. She's regarded as your female father. As a young girl, you might be sent to her house over the weekend or on holidays. And again, her role is to pass on knowledge to you, to teach you about your body, to teach you about sexuality, And I feel like, well, for me, I would love this to be a role that godmothers now play, right?
Yes.
Wouldn't that be an amazing role to give a godmother? Yeah. I feel like we should all find sex aunties for our children and our nieces.
You know what is so beautiful talking? I mean, I'm such a privilege with that podcast. I talk to all those incredible visionary women and people like you. And it inspires me for my own godmother being. I don't have children, but I have a beautiful goddaughter, the daughter of my sister. And now as you spoke, I thought, wow, that's how we bring in change. That would also be an expression of activism to, no one in my family did it. And there is probably a huge amount of shame in our Western culture imagining I'm going to teach my godchild how to touch her genitalia. Luckily, I've liberated myself from that shame. So what if I stood forward and said, that I allow that to be part of our growing together. You said before, intergenerational teaching is the most powerful.
Absolutely, and I feel like part of what parents need to do is just have conversations with the person they've appointed as godmother and say, hey, I would like you to have this explicit role in my child's life, to be a sex auntie to her, to be able to speak to her about her body, to be a safe person she can come to speak to ask questions, to answer questions. I've tried to do that for my godchild. I buy her books, I send them to her. We have conversations. When she was 16 and she was not even sexually active, she was telling me how she identified as bisexual, which I was really impressed by.
Wow.
Because I also identify as bisexual, but I didn't do so until I was like in my late 20s, And I think just having that person, that older woman that you trust, who you have a good relationship with, that you can speak to, it's so healthy and so needed for young girls.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking there, going one more time back to the discussion of colonization and the power of coloniality, which is still very much in our lives, One question which I'm always grappling with and I want to ask, and I feel maybe there is something connected to that imagination. What if I would speak about those things and teach those things to my godchild? One question I'm always grappling with is, how can we recognize when we often unconsciously, how can we become conscious, especially as white European people, I want to say, when we still are very much caught up in those constructs, or actually unconsciously reenact those powers? How I sometimes ask, wow, how can we know how that, it's kind of a very big question, an open question, and also a reflection, but I share it.
So what's the question exactly?
What is the question exactly? That's how does colonialism, or the power of colonialism, still live in our bodies and live in my action? And very often I'm unconscious about, right? And how can we learn to notice, or how might we notice? Does that make sense? It's a big question.
How can you be more aware of, in a sense, when you're enforcing colonial structures and beliefs?
Yeah.
It's a great question to ask. I mean, to be honest, I feel like everybody has to ask themselves that question, right? Because colonization lies not just within the bodies of the people whose people were colonizers, and like we know, colonization it's also still exists, right? There's new colonization, but also within the colonized subject, right? Um, and I think the awareness is the first thing.
Yes, yes.
Being aware that the structure exists, recognizing that it comes with power, that it plays out both within you and within the outside world. And I think if you've made a decision that you do not want to intentionally reinforce that, just really being aware and being alert to the ways in which it might show up. And when it shows up and you are in a position to stop it, you stop it,
Yes.
And I think it really depends upon the scenario you find yourself in, yeah, it really depends upon the scenario that you find yourself in. But I think that awareness is the most important thing. And recognizing it is the important thing. I mean, can you hear that noise in the background?
But probably the system can take it out. It will be fine. I can remove background noises. It's very good.
That's okay, because I have some workmen in my house. I was like, let me know if I need to go and tell them to stop.
No, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah. So I mean, I feel like that is the main thing,
And the open-mindedness, what you said before, that what you just say, I actually absolutely agree with you. It starts with the awareness. Yeah, that's the seed. And the open-mindedness, I think what you spoke to before, the pluriverse, both with menstrual practices or sexual practices, gender fluidity, the pluriverse, right? It's to unbinarize ourselves, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe can you speak a little bit more to, of course, we already touched upon that a lot now, what sexual freedom is, but maybe we can go even a little bit more deeply into that. I'll think of, how would that look like in my life as an adult woman if I live a sexually free life, a life of sexual freedom?
So that's like such a great question, and it's a question that I like to ask people to also do in like a workshop setting. So we can do this as an exercise right now.
Yes, I'm just going to put my fan on again.
Yeah, just to prep folks who may be listening, if you're somewhere where you can relax, if there's somewhere where you can get comfy in your seat, ground your feet, take a couple of deep breaths in and exhale, and just take some space and time just to center yourself and be present. And I'd just like to invite you to imagine a day that's 10 years from today where you are sexually free, where all your dreams, all your desires, all your hopes have come true. You're happy, you're fulfilled, you're healthy, you're surrounded by people who love you. What I want to ask you now is what that experience is like for you. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you sense? What do you smell? What does sexual freedom sound like for you? How do you know that you're free? What tells you that you're sexually free? What are the experiences that you've had? Are there people in your life that you've walked away from? Are there people in your life that you're more deeply connected to? And then just take a couple of deep breaths in at your own pace and then out. And then whenever you're ready, you can start by wiggling your fingers, wiggling your toes, coming back into the space. opening your eyes, looking around you, and maybe grab a pen, paper. If you're holding your phone, you can open up your voice recorder and just write down what came up for you as sexual freedom. Because I think sexual freedom is very individual,
Yes.
right? What sexual freedom means to me would be very different from what it means to you, Florina. For me, sexual freedom is very much about feeling at home in my body. Our bodies are first homes. It's where we need to feel free. And sometimes sexual freedom for me is just like lying on my bed with no clothes on, with my breasts just going whichever way they want to, right? And sometimes for me, sexual freedom is about a fun sexual activity that I have been fantasizing about for a while. And sometimes sexual freedom is solo sex on my own and just, making myself feel good. And then for somebody, sexual freedom might be actually, I don't want to have sex with anybody. I just want to be on my own and take time to discover myself and what works for me. So it is very individual. And again, I also think it is cyclical, right? So what might represent sexual freedom for us in the here and now may not be sexually free for us in 5 years, 10 years, when we've experienced a growth, when we've changed, when we've shaped, I also think sexual freedom is about the community. I feel like if the people around us are not sexually free, if we live in a community where, for instance, queer people are being criminalized, sex workers are being harassed, then as a society, there isn't sexual freedom. When we see the rights of trans people being rolled back, freedom is collective, it's not individual. There's an individual journey we can go on, but that individual journey is meaningless without community. So sexual freedom is really, really layered, and it'll be different for everybody.
Wow, thank you so much for taking me and us through that exercise, reflection. It felt like a meditation actually, and it's recorded, so people can go back to it. And it's interesting, what really came up for me was nature. I saw myself very earthly, wild, in very in touch with nature, which interestingly, I live in a city, London, which is, if I'm being very honest, something I miss. So how that question, what is sexual freedom, actually shows you maybe a very deep, important longing I have to follow if I stay true.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
And there was something else. Yeah, wow. And on that breath, sometimes when I prepare for a podcast, I wonder, what would Soft Rebellion ask, whoever Soft Rebellion is? It's both, it's all they, she, him. What would Soft Rebellion ask? And that question came up, can pleasure itself be a form of resistance? And what does it mean to resist? So I ask you, can pleasure be a form of resistance?
I think pleasure is a form of resistance, absolutely. Especially, with people from historically marginalized backgrounds who have not been given space to indulge in a hedonistic life, to indulge in the pleasures of, of food, of sex, of community, of organizing, of being with each other, right? Making space and time to do that is absolutely an act of resistance. And I feel like when you are living in oppressive times, being intentional about creating space and time for pleasure is important. When you're a woman who is expected to, from morning to evening, be meeting the needs of other people, and you carve out time for yourself, or you start with yourself, that's an act of resistance. That's pleasure as resistance. I think it's super, super important. And, I think as an activist, because space and time pleasure is important, it comes back to what we're speaking about at the beginning. It's also about ensuring you stay soft. It's also about ensuring that you're in it for the long term. It's also about ensuring that you keep your own well, filled, such that you're able to give back.
Sometimes it happens that the soft rebellion has many definitions, Nana, and I feel we just birthed another one. The soft rebellion is she or they who use pleasure as a form of resistance.
I
That is
love
also a
that.
definition, right? Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
And yeah, when I heard you now, then I thought, wow, yeah, I imagined those women or people being, wow, working just in that linear drive, and how pleasure kind of takes us out of that, opens us to the cyclical. And I felt, wow, it can be a real move from productivity to creativity, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm always so aware that if we talk about our genitals, it is creative organs of creation. That's
Literally organs of creation, right?
mm-hmm.
And I mean, having an organ of creation doesn't mean it needs to like literally birth a human being. It births pleasure,
No.
it births well-being. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Wow. We walked a circle. I always trust at one point we come back, and what you just said there, that's a wonderful place to kind of wrap up to, because that's the other thing which needs happen, right? We do need to kind of de-link, especially as
Yeah.
us female people, our wombs from reproduction. We can create gestate, but we can gestate any creative project. It is a place of gestation, but not just human gestation. Wow. I would like to invite you share how can people work with you? You've got 2 books, right? But I would like to invite you to speak to the audience.
Yeah. Well, for people who wish to stay engaged with me, check out my website, which is darkoa.com. And Darkoa is spelled Darkoa, the writer. I also have a Substack, the African Pleasure Fairy Godmother. So folks can sign up to my Substack, which I try and update fairly regularly. And on Instagram, I have an account called The Sex Lives of African Women. So those are the ways in which to stay connected with me.
And those links they are in the show notes by the time listeners hear that. So that's all going to be very easy to find.
Brilliant.
Is there anything else, Nana, which you feel needs to be said or named or voiced, or does that feel also a good place to come to closure?
I like where we landed. Yeah. This whole conversation has felt very soft and gentle. So thank you for holding the space with such care.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, dear listener, for being with me, with us, with Nana Darkoa. And thank you, Nana, for taking your time to share from your life story, the story behind the book of sexual freedom, and your incredible work. And encouraging, inspiring, reminding us what sexual freedom might be about, or might else be about. And as always, dear listener, I know I repeat myself, but you literally can't imagine how much this means or would mean to me if you are able to leave a review for the Soft Rebellion. This really helps. Well, it helps me because it's just beautiful to notice that I'm not just talking to myself. And it's really interesting and inspiring to hear what lands with you and what doesn't. And it really helps to kind of to create bigger waves with those conversations and to share them with an even wider audience. So thank you so much for leaving a review. And you can always reach out to me. That's softrebellion@florinatali.com, or on social media, florina.tali. I'm looking forward to hear from you. I wish you a gorgeous, nurturing summer break despite the heat. And I'm looking forward to share more softly rebellious conversations with you this September. Lots of love.